Tethered, Decay, and Fastened Renewal by CozyEarth. Read by AJ Morningstar / Supernova Podfic. Chapter 3 Bus Ride. Summary. Danny prepares for his new life in Gotham. Buses aren't known for being the most comfortable or efficient way of travel, but given the circumstances around everything, Danny couldn't really complain. Danny didn't really know what he was getting into when he was shoved onto the bus with a one-way ticket to Gotham, but anywhere was safer than going back home. No way he could look the Fentons in the eye and not feel the nausea take over. Even thinking about what had happened would bring about his racing heart, intense sweating, uncomfortable chills, trembling, or difficulty in breathing despite not needing to as a ghost. So he chose not to dwell on it, at least for now. For now, Danny needed to focus on a game plan. First thing first was getting a relatively safe, or at least discreet location to hide out in and heal for a while. Gotham was infamous in the Infinite Realms for having a ton of natural ectoplasm in the air, making it home to many weaker ghosts and shades, which Danny was feeling a lot like right now. Having a healing factor helped, but right now it was working overtime just to keep Danny from melting into his core. If that happened, he would have no way to protect himself or run if he needed to. So that was out. Now that he wasn't running on adrenaline, he had time to investigate his bag, his only lifeline at the moment. Sam had provided money and some spare clothes in his emergency bag. It was enough money to get an apartment, but not enough to keep a place for very long, so he would need a job. The fake ID and new phone Tucker made him would help in that endeavor, as long as he got a job somewhere that wouldn't dig too deep and notice the cracks in his story. Thankfully, Gotham was known for being on the sketchier side of things, if not a little dangerous. So, as long as he didn't apply to Wayne Tech or something crazy like that, he was good. Hopefully. During the long drive to the terrifying city, Danny had used the new phone Tucker had made him in case of needing to go off the grid to look into cheap housing. He needed it to be ready for him when he got there so he could crash and sleep for a week. He will always be thankful for both of his friends. He didn't know what he'd do if they hadn't helped him get started in the right direction to look. He knew money and Wi-Fi were a must, so looking he did. After research and a few snacks and protein bars Jazz snuck him, he found something. Apparently, the cheapest places were located in an area of Gotham called Parks Row. Looking further into it, the reason why it was so cheap probably had something to do with how it was locally referred to. Crime Alley. Great. Looking into employment was also fascinating to Danny. A majority of the job listings for the immediate area all seemed to have the same few contacts. Also great. Definitely not sketchy. Danny wasn't up to date with all the Gotham vigilantes, but he definitely would recognize one called Red Hood. So probably a crime boss or something, given the context around everything. But seriously, even a soup kitchen had him down as a contact. Guess it's just a Gotham thing Danny was going to have to work with. Hopefully this Red Hood guy wasn't too bad of a boss. Or his assistant either, for that matter. Some Jason dude Danny couldn't remember. As long as they didn't get into too much trouble with the local bats and birds, Danny could manage. Speaking of vigilantes, Danny really needed to do his best to avoid them if he could help it. He didn't know that much about all. He knew of Batman. Batman was a founding member of the Justice League that never answered any of the calls from Amity Park for help. Not when the ghosts first showed up, not when they got pulled into another dimension, not when it got too much for Danny and he just needed a break or even a little help. The Justice League that didn't stop the anti-Ecto acts. The Justice League that worked for the government. The government that had the GIW under their payroll. The GIW that had escalated things with the Ghost, even after most had mellowed out and only really crossed over to see Phantom. The GIW that didn't mind hurting civilians to get what they want. The GIW that the Fentons were going to hand him over to. The Fentons that breathe, Danny. Remember, breathe, just like Jazz taught him. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold the breath for 7 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds. Breathe. Danny, breathe. He was going to be okay, as long as there was no contact with Batman, no matter what. When the city came into view, Danny had 3 months' rent on his new apartment, job applications sent into several openings, and a pulling in his core. The pulling. It felt familiar, terrifying, comforting. The warm swelling of hope overtook the bleeding pain in his chest from his injuries. It felt like fire and lightning. It, his core called out on its own. It cried out. It cried out with all the pain and hurt he had been avoiding. It cried out in fear. It cried out in hope. It cried out, craving comfort for something familiar. It cried out, and something cried back. Chapter 4. Hangover. Summary. Jason wakes up with a headache and no answers. Jason was hungover. He was sure of it. He doesn't remember drinking, doesn't know why he'd be drinking, but he probably blacked out really fast. Bruce must have really pissed him off or something. There wasn't any other way to explain what was happening. This was a hangover. Nausea, the desire to vomit, stomach pain, coiling inside him was another good indicator of hangover. His mouth was uncomfortably dry, and an excessive thirst took him over as he slowly woke up and attempted to sit up a little. He didn't get very far, only shifting a little higher on the bed. His muscles ached in a throbbing synced with his rapid heartbeat that covered his whole body, and a shakiness in his joints that could only result in fatigue from drinking and a weakness due to the poor sleep he'd been having. A strange sensation akin to pulling or maybe reaching lightly swelled in his chest. It was weird, but he didn't feel wrong or out of place. When nothing else happened, Jason decided it wasn't a concern for right now. He blinked slowly as the world formed out of the fog of still half-awake state. The headache that had formed over the past few days had amplified irritably, making him dizzy and sensitive to the light and sounds of his safe house, or rather, the Batcave. The Batcave? No way he'd be in the Batcave if he'd been drinking. No. Was he drugged during last night's patrol? Maybe, but when? It was probably connected to everything going on with the pits. Maybe he was being targeted. That would explain a lot, but he just couldn't remember why he blacked out. His head was pounding, making it hard to sort out his thoughts. The pulling in his chest seemed to sink at the thought of it. Jason let out a groan as he sat himself all the way up, or at least attempted to. The movement caused him to sway, and hands came from somewhere to support him. Easy, Jay. You've been out for a few hours. We still don't know what happened. The low, familiar voice filled the space as Jason turned to see who had caught him. Dick. Dick was here, standing next to him, having rushed over from where he had been sitting to support Jason. His shoulders were tense, and he was wearing that fake smile he did when he didn't want to show how worried he actually was. Most people wouldn't even be able to tell that he was a ball of nerves, but Jason had learned to read his brother after all these years, no matter how good Dickie got at hiding his feelings. He could read all of his family's tells, but Dick was the easiest for him. Right now, though, the way Dick's eyes were slightly wider as Jason steadied himself on the bed would be easy for anyone to see through. Safe to say he was out a lot longer than a few hours. That's right, it had just been morning, and he was on the roof with Dick after patrol. He'd been asking if Jason was going to come to the manor for breakfast. It was his latest attempt to lighten Jason's mood, while the tiredness growing in him only seemed to sour it. Dick, not knowing what had happened, given that he was right there with him, wasn't good. Looking around, Jason could see that he was in the cave's med bay. He couldn't see the others, but the hushed tones of talking and the distinct tap-tap-tapping of keys that belonged to the Bat computer told him they were around. Looking past Dick, the screens on the nearest monitor indicated that his vitals were fine, and that it was late into the evening. He definitely was out longer than a few hours. And the Bat fam were obviously anxious. The pulling fluttered at the sentiment. Jason let out an exhausted sigh. So other than me being passed out for too fucking long, everything else is fine. The whole ordeal was already so draining. Jason really didn't want to add suddenly becoming narcoleptic on top of everything. We ran all the usual tests, then the more lucrative ones. When those came back clean, normal across the board, B thinks it was magic. Dick gestured out to the rest of the cave at the mention of Bruce. He's fully convinced it's tied to your sleep problem, and he and Tim have been trying to get into contact with Constantine all day. He huffed out a laugh when Jason rolled his eyes at this. Personally, I think he's avoiding B on purpose. Can't blame him, but now's really not the time to be petty, Dick snarked as he walked over to the entrance of the medbay. Everyone has been trying to figure out what's going on. Damie has been going on about death days or something. Talia apparently was looking into their importance a while ago, but it's been a dead end so far. Hey, B, Jace is up. Tims, can you go get Alfie? Thanks, Dick shouted out into the cave louder than necessary, then turned back to Jason. Those two haven't moved from the back computer all day. I think Alfie was 2 seconds away from pulling the plug so they would eat. He shook his head. That wasn't anything new. Everyone knew Tim got his bad work habits from B. Speak of the devil. Bruce was basically running into the med bay, stopping at the door and straightening himself out before he spoke. J-Lad. The breathy way he spoke, as tired eyes met his, almost had Jason flinching. After all this time, no matter how much everyone avoided bringing it up, they all knew Bruce was still and would forever be haunted by Jason's death. It was a big part of him coming back to the Bat Fam. Even if he'd never get the revenge he wanted, Jason knew his dad regretted everything involving his death and coming back as Red Hood. He just didn't know how to express it. It took a while to come to that conclusion, anger still clouding his feelings on the matter at times. Things weren't perfect, and they still fought more often than not, but in moments like now, it was very clear. Bruce was haunted, and Jason was his ghost. Jason was the first to break eye contact. I'm not planning on going back in the ground anytime soon, old man. Just feel like I'm having the hangover of all fucking hangovers. On the bright side, I finally got some goddamn sleep, he huffed out, feigning annoyance to try and move past the awkward air between them. Bruce's worn-out eyes softened, and he walked over to sit next to Jason's bed. I'm fine. And as soon as the room stops spinning, I'm going back to my place. And, ah, fine, I'll stay here for the night, but only because Alfie said that he'd be making beef stew. Jason, what? I'm glad you're all right. A foreign yet familiar sensation stirred in Jason's chest. The pulling in him felt almost like a purr. Yeah, love you too, and whatever.